and I fit in the boxes. Stop it, quitting was never an option. Exhausted, this passion is never exhausted. And you cannot stop it, nah, you cannot stop it. Quitting was never an option. And you cannot stop it, nah, you cannot stop it.
I don't know why they were using rockets, but there you go.
Yeah. It's when you read these ancient accounts of these flying machines, it's strange because some of them make so much rumbling and noise, just like our modern day rockets. And some of them have the ability to fly silent. It's almost like the evolution of technology took place prior to us learning about chemical rockets and rocketry. Eventually, we'll have devices. I think the U.S. military probably has flying machines that don't make a lot of sound, probably like the TR-3B, the Flying Triangle, the Aurora project, and some other technologies that are black budget projects. So it's almost like we're just repeating a cycle again. It's not like it seems like we're just rediscovering something that already exists. And it might be that our scientists and researchers are just investigating the ancient past and taking ideas from what happened before and then reinventing it now.
Oh, most definitely. The whole rocket thing, though, it does trip me up a little bit as an ancient technology researcher. I'm like, well, where's the UFO? Where's the, gravitic mercury plasma driven drive that, like, there it is, So a lot of these depictions, right, of this more primitive form of technology, I still, again, start to equate it to, I agree with you. There's an evolution perhaps in the types of tech that was used. Not sure why. Maybe it's just, cultural, but there could be a similarity with, for instance, let's say the Anunnaki theoretically used some form of a rocket. It could be very interesting that Werner von Braun and others were like, rockets. And then if you look at rockets today, like, they're like self-landing themselves. And like, it's, you're going to be like, oh, look, it's a rocket landing. Yeah, no big deal.
Yeah.
So maybe the technology for us in the next 20 years with AI and things with rockets and other forms of propulsion that can be harnessed without having to be like a civilization zero and we're taking it from the planet. Maybe there's some other way where we're like, oh, look, rocket fuel can be synthesized out of water.
Mm-hmm.
We might start to look again at the ancient evidence of rockets and see a deeper connection that's still just not apparent to us yet. Because I too have wondered, why, if you're coming here from Nibiru or something, you have showing us you're traveling from Mars to Earth and other places. Were you using rockets? I still don't know.
Yeah, it's a mind-boggling thing. One of the theories I came up with, just a theory, was that potentially there could have been a breaking off where they got here through higher levels of technology, prior generations, and then one or two generations may have felt like they were stuck here. Somehow the technology of flight and interplanetary travel got lost, and they were redeveloping technologies trying to get back into space, so they started developing rocketry. I was just thinking, like, hypothesizing what would happen here if, we were an advanced civilization with anti-gravity, and then all of a sudden we had an EMP that destroyed all the communications, all the electronics, and we couldn't communicate for a while, and we went back almost to like a Bronze Age type civilization, and we had to rebuild again. We don't know. I mean, I know how anti-gravity works by just, talking about it, but I can't build it. So maybe you'll say, well, we still have to travel in some way. We gotta utilize what we do know how to make. And maybe we'll make some rockets and some combustion engines and so forth. And so kind of working our way back up towards high levels of technology. That's only a hypothesis or a theory that I came up with.
I like that theory. I would throw at you to say that at one point the gods chose to come down and confuse all of our languages.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's a truncated version of saying they wiped out all of our tech and EMP'd us and we couldn't do anything and we had to rebuild.
Right.
You know what I mean? Yeah, there's that same evidence again of the Tower of Babel. Why is it that culturally we were not able to work together, and as soon as we came together to reach the heavens again, literally it says this in the Bible, they came down and confused our languages. So and it's interesting too that the Sumerian depictions of the Tower of Babel, at the top there's two suns depicted.
That's
almost
right.
as if they knew that we might be a binary star system, which is a whole other conversation that we might touch on as far as cycles of time and such. But,
Mhm. Yeah.
we get
That's so
small
true.
pieces of evidence, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's what it's all about. Just researching and looking for every single glimmer of evidence or information or corroborating evidence that we can discover so that we can just create paint ourselves a better picture. It doesn't mean that we're 1,000% right. It just means that we're using circumstantial evidence to paint a picture so that we can have maybe a clearer vision of what may have happened in the ancient past.
I usually try and tell people, look, I'm not trying to convince you of anything. I'm still trying to learn myself.
Yeah.
What I can do is say, here's the evidence that led up to me having an opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I base my opinion on all this stuff. Let me share it with you. You decide.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no other way I can really do that. I'm very respectful to everyone's beliefs and ideas, because, that's how we learn and grow.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Very true. And speaking of this, these cycles of technology and rise and fall of civilizations, do you think the Mayan calendar tried to predict the end of time in 2012?
I think it was partly the media and in our civilization in current times, not understanding cycles of time, right? So we looked at that and said, oh my God, it's another doomsday date. They've predicted it. No, it turns out that, the Mayans had multiple calendars that were, served different purposes. And they had this long count calendar that was more for predictions. And, on that calendar, separate from the one about like cycles of time, but on this prediction calendar, they said, at a certain time, our god Kukulkan is going to return.
Mm-hmm.
And, there were signs, a comet showed up and the advisors were like, look, dude, his sign, Kukulkan's coming.
Yeah. And
so when the conquistadors showed up, they were very fearful that, oh my God, it's Kukulkan. He's going to like wipe us out because we were following Huitzilopochtli, this, bad god essentially. Yeah. And so they were like fearful, and they adorned the conquistadors with all their gold and assets and such. And what do? First of all, the priests and the conquistadors were very much, were scared of the level of technology and understanding of the movements of the heavens that they presented. It was way beyond what they could, comprehend. And so that scared them, and they destroyed all of their knowledge, burned all their codices, So, it's a real interesting way to look at, some of the ways advanced knowledge has been perceived by other cultures. And the Mayans definitely had that glimpse of predictions that not always came right, but their calendar system was extremely accurate. And they showed cycles of time, right? So 2012 was just basically the ending of an age, the age of Aquarius. They knew that, every 2,000 years, there's this new North Star, that there's cycles of time. Mm-hmm. So it's just like the clock hitting midnight. It just keeps going again. Right. And so that was the understanding, is to realize we're now moving into a new age. What does that mean? We've jumped from Pisces to Aquarius. Mm-hmm. And, everyone can think of that as, again, more mythological and fuzzy and such. But when you look into the data, you could literally track how Pisces, Jesus, that whole time period since 2012 has kind of shifted its focus, and non-traditional ideas, non-North American white traditional ideas, thank God, have been expanded, right? To a much more accurate set of saying, well, where do we really come from? So that's just in alignment with the Age of Aquarius, an expansion of knowledge. So I find that interesting that there are these cycles, that we can point to and trying to understand how does it affect us sometimes on larger scales of time.
Right. Yeah. And, it's mind blowing, these cycles of time, because, this precession of the equinox, they call it the great year. And, that's the movement of the constellations across the sky. And like you said, we're heading into the Age of Aquarius now, which, like you said, thank God, it's time for awakening. It's time for enlightenment. But they're not going to go without any kicking and screaming. But we're kicking and kicking and screaming our way into this movement of this Age of Aquarius, where we are going to start to think for ourselves a little more, ask more questions, and seek more answers, and even stop complaining about problems, become part of the solutions to problems. And when I look back at this whole Mayan thing, and I researched them very heavily, I've been down there so many times. The sacrifices that they used to make, and pulling people's hearts out while they were still beating, and throwing virgins in what they call a well, but it doesn't look like a well. It looks like a silo to me. But that's a whole nother podcast. But this barbaric mentality, but also then having this other supposed level of super sophistication, it almost seems as if their civilization were influenced by these gods or these people, these advanced beings that had this advanced knowledge. And at some point, these people were left. They disappeared, and they became revered, and they became deified by the Mayans. But generations later, they just became maybe a cargo cult, where they really didn't have the super advanced knowledge as their ancestors did. And the evidence of that maybe could be the fact that they were pulling these hearts out and sacrificing virgins and sacrificing the ball court players. It just didn't seem to me like a civilization that was so high level and so advanced could then and build pyramids and these structures in the particular ways that they are, and all the alignments that they discovered with the stars, and then rip somebody's heart out while it was still beating. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it.
That's an interesting point, Billy. Let me shed a little bit of information on that I recently was researching for some of the ancient alien data, one of the episodes, specifically on the Mayan gods. And I, looking into some of the research there, it's interesting because when we go to sites like Chichen Itza and we see, this pyramid, and it's dedicated to the feathered serpent Kukulkan, and then in the duality of some of these other places where you have these large city centers where they were putting skulls on spikes and sacrifice and such. There's an interesting duality that's come to light in the sense that most of these cultures seem to have a dichotomy of either between two brothers or between like Zeus and Prometheus, Enki and Enlil. One's good, one's a champion of mankind, one's not. One wants to give knowledge to man, Prometheus, one wants to keep it, Zeus. And we see the same thing playing out in the Mayan culture, where one of the relatives, I believe it was his brother, is this god Huitzilopochtli, and he's the brother of Kukulkan. And I have to fact check what I'm saying, but I'm pretty sure that he's a relative, and it could be his brother. But this other god Huitzilopochtli eventually pushed Kukulkan out, and he sailed away on this serpent vessel. But what's interesting is that Huitzilopochtli replaced the offerings of incense and flowers and passion and love and all the things that Kukulkan was a part of. And now Huitzilopochtli is like, I want sacrificial. I am the god of darkness and of chaos, and I want suffering and pain. And that somehow the sacrifice, the hearts, there was some other things going on where if he's non-human, perhaps taking the energy, the life force of these beings being sacrificed was feeding him in a way where we don't understand. Yeah. But there is a duality of gods across cultures, one good for man, one bad, and they war against each other. And you see that playing out in the Mayan culture, just the same between Huitzilopochtli and Kukulkan. And you wonder again, is this a mythological tale being told from an older civilization's tale, or is it just happening across cultures? Sometimes I'm not sure about that part.
Yeah. It's really intriguing, man. It's so intriguing, and what you're right about that dichotomy between the two. It's that yin and yang, that dark, that light, the good and evil. In the biblical text in Isaiah 47, it says, I created the good and I create the evil. Do what I saith the Lord. So it's letting you know there, even from that text, that somehow the good and the evil is coming from one source, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, it is.
Wow.
The biblical information, and just pivoting quickly away from the Mayans, but the biblical information around these topics has been very strong, and sometimes even with censorship. I was raised as a Christian. Was never religious, though. I had a very strong Christian presence in my life. My aunt is still a pastor. But
Nice.
you know, it just never was my religion of choice. It was like, well, there's all these religions, and I learned something from all of them. This is where I stand, you know,
Yeah.
peacefully. But it is interesting to note that, you know, when I started looking into the Sumerian information, realizing that we're talking about, you know, there's a English New King James version, and then there's an Old Testament Hebrew version.
Mm-hmm.
Keeps going. There's an Akkadian version, and then a Sumerian version.
Yeah.
And so a lot of these source information, you know, that we have in these older Sumerian, Akkadian, the descriptions are much longer. Instead of like 7 days of creation,
Mm-hmm.
we have 7 tablets of creation, part of a much longer set, right? So, you know, I found it very interesting that in the 20 years of looking into the Sumerian information and really understanding the biblical origins of trying to verify, uphold the biblical veracity of what's being said, not challenge it and saying it's wrong, but saying this stuff is true. It turns out that, you know, there's lots of Christian proponents in our, you know, ufology zone that over time always demolished Zecharia Sitchin.
Yeah.
You know, the best researcher that spent 50 years really bringing to light a lot of these initial awarenesses of the Anunnaki, the Sumerians. Mm-hmm. And while he was alive, you know, he was vehemently attacked, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And, you know, others were like, you know, look, you're wrong. And if you look into your background, certain people that were saying these things, it was always a religious bias. They're a Christian, they're this, they're that, they're a biblical scholar. Yeah. But they never approached it like Zecharia Sitchin. And I would say to them, or anyone, I'd say, well, if you take Zecharia Sitchin, looking at the text and the linguistic angle, and then you take Eric von Daniken, and he's got the physical evidence and the sites and the locations, and you put them together, that's the ancient astronaut theory. So it's really interesting that when Sitchin passed away, the level of incredulity on he's wrong and he was always wrong went like 300%. There's a website out there called sitchiniswrong.com, and it's by an author, you know what I mean? And one day I thought for fun, you know, I'm going to just go ahead and launch sitchinisright.com, which is still live. And, you know, it's interesting that battle, you know, of attacking this information has only come from a few voices that were just using it to, I guess, make a living or something.
I call it cloud chasing.
Chasing. My ending point is it's a very interesting, you know, turn of events when we look at like what's happening today, and you flip on the news or, you know, look in the paper or you see what current topics are. I would say to those people, if you look over your head right now, there's a large plane that's spelling out in smoke. I told you so.
Mm-hmm. That's a fact. That's something that they don't even talk about, and they can't deny it. It's right there, and it's being presented to us almost on a day-by-day basis at this moment. Everything we talked about for the last 30 years is coming to fruition and being not that it hadn't existed, but the fruition for it is actually it's being validated, and that's what I love. We're living in a time of validation where things that we talked about, so many different things, even outside of the UFO and ancient astronaut theory, are being validated, and it's got people scratching their heads.
Yeah, all kinds of science and other topics that.
That's right.
You know, even with technology and AI and such, we're getting exponential amounts of learning. Mm-hmm. So it's very exciting.
Yeah, it's an exciting time to be alive, really. I mean, some people see it as a doomsday event, but I don't see it as the end. I see it as the beginning.
I heard somewhere, real quickly, I heard somewhere, you know, around thought that, you know, if you maintain a thought for 16 seconds and take it beyond that, you're actually helping materialize what you want, right? And so that can be a good thing if you're focusing on obtaining things that are going to help benefit your life or your family, and you spend more than 16 seconds focusing on that and bringing it to fruition. It's not a bad thing, but perhaps don't spend more than 16 seconds saying bad things or worrying about, oh my God, the end of the world. There's a planet hiding behind the sun and it's going to kill us. Yeah. What can you do about it?
Right.
Nothing.
Don't
worry about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Plus, it's probably not even true. So don't worry about it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Just live your life, man, and enjoy your family, enjoy your friends, love one another, and try to be the best of assistance you can to everybody, and follow your passions. That's really what living is all about.
Yeah, that sounds good. That's a good
Yeah.
life philosophy for sure.
Yeah, man. In these ancient texts, they talk about these other beings called the Ijiji. I kind of liken them to a worker race because it says that they did a lot of the work, but they didn't seem to be slaves. So if I had a construction company, I would have a master architect who would draw up a blueprint, and that blueprint would be given to like an engineer and a foreman, and then they would then go out and hire people to do the actual physical labor. So it seems like the Ijiji were on the physical labor level of this pyramid of work. Watch this video for free at www.4bk.tv or download the app on your smartphone, Fire Stick app, Samsung TV, Roku, and other app providers.